What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Titletown Talk. I'm your host, Ian Ewing. Welcome to the show, guys. It's been a minute since we've talked. I hope everybody's had a good week. I hope everybody has recovered from the Packers-Bears game. I know I have barely recovered. Anyway, let's talk about a couple of news items today. I'm going to try to keep this a little bit shorter. I don't have a lot of notes on this, so I'm going to sort of talk fast, take chances, and ad-lib a little bit. But first thing we got to talk about. The Packers have hired Jonathan Gannon to be their defensive coordinator. So we're going to talk through that decision on today's episode. They also made a few other changes on the coaching staff, which we'll talk about, starting with Sean Mannion. Sean Mannion is now the Eagles' offensive coordinator. And again, I have no notes for this. I'm just kind of ad-libbing it. Sean Mannion was what we'd like to call a fast riser. When the Packers hired him as the quarterback's coach after Tom Clements retired last year, LaFleur said he's going to be a superstar coach in this league. And it only took him one season to become a play caller and an offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, the 2 year ago Super Bowl champions. So again, I think that's a big loss for the Packers offense. I do think that I do wish they would have maybe promoted him over Adam Stenavich and had a new voice in there, but we don't know if Adam Stenavich is good or bad because we aren't in those rooms. But I do think that it was, by all accounts, a big loss for the Packers losing Sean Mannion to the Eagles. First little addition to the coaching staff, Babich. Some of you guys are wondering who the hell that is. He is the former Buffalo Bills defensive coordinator, and he actually interviewed to be the defensive coordinator in 2024 when Hafley was hired. He's very highly thought of. There were a lot of Packers pundits. I know Andy Herman. There were a few others that really liked him as a potential defensive coordinator for the Packers when Hafley was hired. So getting him on the staff, he's going to be the new passing game coordinator and DB coach for the Packers. I do think that's a really, really big hire for them. Now, the reason it's a big hire is because the Packers also lost Ryan Downard. Hafley stole him and took him to Miami with him. He'd been working with the safety room the past couple years under Hafley, and I thought he did a really good job. I mean, the safety room has developed into what I would call one of the best in the league. You look at what Evan Williams has become. You know, Xavier McKinney was a good safety when he was with the Giants, but he's become a all-pro safety for the second year in a row. So you have to think that's a pretty big loss for the Packers. So to get another high caliber coach in, one with defensive coordinator experience in Bobby Babich, I think that's a massive hire. Derek Ansley is now a Miami Dolphin as well. We just learned that the other day. He is going to Miami with Hafley. Hafley's robbing this staff, guys. Man. And then linebackers coach was a little bit of a surprising move. They actually hired Sam Siefkes. He is the linebackers coach now. For the Packers. He was under Gannon in 2024 in Arizona. The reason it's so odd is because we all kind of thought Nick Rallis would come over and be the linebackers coach. Over here, he was the defensive coordinator under Gannon last year in Arizona. He also did linebacker coaching for the Eagles in 2022. And if you think about that season, he had, TJ Edwards had his best season, got him paid by the Bears. He's never been quite as good since. Siefkes is interesting, though. He was actually the D coordinator at Virginia Tech last year. He's a Wisconsin native. I did not know this. He actually coached at UW La Crosse and my alma mater, UW Platteville. Good old UWP. And by all accounts, he's actually a pretty good hire. I won't get too far into the weeds, but I do think they needed a new linebackers coach. And it was sort of the decision was made for them because they lost Sean Duggan to Hafley again in Miami. I thought the linebackers took a bit of a step back last year, so let's just talk about that quick. I thought we saw some really good stuff from Quay at the end of 2024. We all know, how good Edgerrin Cooper was in 2024, and this was all under Anthony Campanile, and he is now the defensive coordinator for the Jaguars, and I just didn't think the linebackers were near as good under Duggan, however you say it. So I think a change needed to be made there. Again, look no further than how bad Quay and McDuffie were in particular in coverage this year, in the way how their depths looked in their drops in pass coverage. So in other words, when the linebackers are in coverage, especially in a zone defense, they have to get depth. In other words, they have to backpedal and get in between the two zones and the two windows, right? Between the safeties and in front of the defensive line. If the linebackers don't get enough depth, there's a lot of room between the linebackers and safeties for people to complete passes. I know maybe I'm overcomplicating it. Maybe I'm confusing you guys a little bit. But for some reason, they were not coached well enough this last year to get enough depth. And that's why you saw the tight ends be such a problem against the Packers. Colson Leveland completely ate Quay Walker alive in the Bears game, both times really. And there were plenty of other games this year where tight ends just had a lot of success. So I think there was a needed change at linebackers coach. Will Sam Siefkes be an improvement? I'm not sure. We won't really know until the season comes, but I love that he has defensive coordinator experience, even though it was at the college level. I love the experience the coaching staff has now in general. You look at Covington, he was the DC for New England in 2024. Babich was a defensive coordinator for Buffalo, and then Siefkes was Virginia Tech's defensive coordinator. Now, again, I'd kind of hoped that they were going to keep Ansley. They lost him, but that would have been cool to have 4 DCs in the coaching backfield. And if you guys remember what I was talking about in the previous episode, the Packers have skimped on defensive or coaching assistants for quite a long time. So this is definitely an improvement. They've got guys with a lot of experience, and I think that's really, really important. So we'll just leave it at that. Let's talk about the big one. Jonathan Gannon was hired as the defensive coordinator. And as you guys may remember, I did talk about DC candidates on the previous episode, and I did not mention Jonathan Gannon. So naturally, I was kicking myself this week because it was pretty obvious that this was going to happen. We talked about what LaFleur was looking for, and this is why it's obvious. He wanted a guy who was previously a head coach, makes sense. A guy who specializes in coaching DBs, and someone with a proven track record. Okay? If you looked at the candidates, he was probably the best guess all along. And like I said, I'm kind of kicking myself for not bringing him up. What I do want to talk about, though, is, again, positives and negatives for this move and kind of explain the why behind why they did this and the rationale for it. First thing I want to do, though, is talk about the other options. Okay? The obvious big one, and I got a couple messages from a few of you guys, Jim Leonhard. I think Jim Leonhard was the best pick. He's the best option out there right now. I think he is going to be a great defensive coordinator. He would have been my pick. If Ian was in charge of the Packers, he would have been mine. I think the reason LaFleur didn't pick him, though, does make sense. We've seen Jim do it at the collegiate level, be a defensive coordinator. And again, the Wisconsin defenses did not have a ton of talent, and he got a lot out of them, right? We've just never seen him do it at the NFL level, right? And there's a lot of pressure on this hire. It needs to be a good hire. And I think Gannon was a safe hire. He's done it before. He's done it at a very high level. He's coordinated a defense all the way to the top of the league in DVOA in 2022. And that defense got all the way to the Super Bowl. Okay? Now, like I said in the previous episode, I do think Matt wanted someone who's been a head coach before. And I think that meant a lot to him. So to have someone in the defensive room that's run a team, Matt runs the offense, Gannon runs the defense, Bisaccia runs the special teams. Sorry. Got a little sick there. They all have head coaching experience, right? And like I said, it's very possible Jim Leonhard ends up being a great DC. And if you guys didn't know, by the way, he got hired by Buffalo. He's Buffalo's defensive coordinator. It was actually this morning that it happened. I'm recording this on Saturday morning, by the way. He interviewed with Baltimore and the Chargers as well. And I think it's highly likely that he does become a really good defensive coordinator. In fact, again, if I had to predict it, I think he's going to be a great DC. But we don't know for sure. This could also go very poorly for him. There have been plenty of guys out there that were really good coaches in college. They were good position coaches. They just weren't good coordinators. So I think Matt LaFleur saw it as too big of a risk to take here. Okay, so whether you love this hire, you hate this hire, you're not sure about this hire, one thing is for sure. Of all the available candidates, at least the ones that we were heard tied to the Packers. I think Jim Schwartz would have been a good option. He was never really tied to the Packers. Of all the options that were heard of as potential options, Gannon had the highest record of success. He's the only candidate out there that's coordinated the top defense in the league and taken a team to the Super Bowl. Okay? Whether we agree with it or not, that's just objectively true. A little bit about his background. I won't get into this a ton. He was actually a scout when he came into the league. I don't know how common that is. It might be super common. It might be super rare. I'm not entirely sure. But he was a scout when he came into the league. The first coaching job that he had was under our old boy Mike Zimmer in Minnesota. He was actually the DB coach for the Vikings that year. And I'm sure if you guys probably remember Zimmer's defenses, he did a pretty good job as a coordinator. And he did win a lot of games for Minnesota, even though we might remember him as not so good. But Gannon's DBs during that time were 5th in the NFL in adjusted yards per attempt, and they only allowed an 84 passer rating. So again, numbers are pretty solid. And if you go look back at the talent in those seasons, there weren't exactly like a roster full of Hall of Famers, right? Before he went to Philly, Gannon, he coached under Matt Eberflus in Indianapolis. Now, again, you guys might be rolling your eyes here. We remember Eberflus in Chicago as a pretty bad coach, right? Even though, need I remind the Bears fans at the beginning of 2023 how everybody was gassing this hire and saying he was so good. They all said the same thing about Shane Waldron, by the way, and then they couldn't wait to throw him under the bus last year, but I digress. Before Chicago, though, Eberflus coordinated some really good defenses in Indy, and that's why he got the job in Chicago, right? So I do think that, he took a little bit from Zimmer, took a little bit from Eberflus, and then he got to Philly in 2021, and that Eagles team was solid on defense his first season. They were 10th in the league in yards allowed, which is good, 11th in passing yards allowed, and then 9th in rushing yards allowed. But they were 26th in the league in turnovers. So I think that sort of impacted the success a little bit in that time period. But here's why Jonathan Gannon is the new DC of the Packers. 2022, Gannon took the Eagles defense over the top. So I'm going to read some stats off for you. The Eagles in 2022 under Gannon had 70 sacks. They were 5th in EPA per play. 5th in total EPA per play, or total EPA, sorry. 1st in EPA per pass, and 1st in the NFL in passing DVOA by a long shot. They were also the 3rd defense in DVOA that season, I believe. Again, the traditional stats were really good too. They gave up the fewest passing yards per game. All the traditional stats were good that year too. Now, the criticism I've heard from everyone who's been like, well, yeah, they had a lot of stars on that team though. So I want to go over the team really quick, okay? So who was on that Eagles defense in 2022? The defensive line was good. Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, Javon Hargrave. A lot of good players, right? No question. But the majority of those guys were also on the team in 2021, and they took a big step in year one, or from year 1 to year 2. Now, Hassan Reddick was one of the big reasons that Eagles defense was so good. He's never been the same since he played under Gannon. Okay? Now, again, I won't get into the weeds too much here, but I think what Gannon did with Reddick that season is what he's going to do with Parsons. He did similar stuff. He moved them all around. He played a little bit of, I think, linebacker, traditional linebacker, and then he rushed the passer. I don't think he's going to play as much linebacker, Micah, but anyway, Hargrave had his best season in 2022. He's never been the same since. He went to San Francisco after that, and he was not very good. In fact, he was so bad that he got cut, and now he's on, I think, the Eagles, it's either on the Vikings or the Bears. I can't remember which one. But he's never been the same since. TJ Edwards had his best season at linebacker that year. Then he got signed by the Bears, and he's been a good linebacker, certainly not great. But here's where it gets interesting. The secondary. James Bradbury was one of their starting corners. Okay, and if you guys are like, who's that? He used to be at the Giants. The Eagles brought him in 22. He had his best season yet. He made a Pro Bowl that year. Since then, he's never been good, and he's out of the league now. 2 years later, he's out of the league. They had Darius Slay that season. That was his best year. He's basically out of the league now. He got cut from Pittsburgh this year, and he was dog shit in Pittsburgh this year. But here's the thing, and this is where we got to give Gannon some credit. They had the best pass defense in the league that season. And at safety, we just went over the corners. They had Marcus Epps at safety and Reed Blankenship. Neither of those guys have been that good really ever since. And certainly Marcus Epps, I don't even know if he started since that season. So this defense didn't have a lot of talent. The defensive line was really good, no question. And is that defensive line better than the Packers defensive line? Yes. But I think every other place, that Packers defense last year had more talent. And we do need to see improvements. We need to add to the corner room. We need to add some defensive line depth. But again, that pass rush, a lot of those guys that were rushing the passer that season that led to the 70 sacks have never been good since Gannon left there. So Gannon has to get credit for that. Okay? So let's get to the interesting part. So Gannon left. He took the Cardinals job in 2023. He became the head coach of the Cardinals. The Eagles in 23 promoted Sean Desai. So the Eagles replaced Gannon with Sean Desai. He ran the same exact scheme as Gannon did. Nearly the same talent in 2023. Sean Desai's running the same scheme, very similar talent. That defense was 30th in EPA per play, 30th in total EPA, and 27th in EPA per pass. So again, rosters were not very different. Hargrave was swapped for Jalen Carter, which Jalen Carter had a really good season, and Nolan Smith was swapped for Hassan Reddick. So it's not like there was this huge talent drain. I know those guys are rookies, but they're really good. So again, I think you can see, look how far off that Eagles defense fell from 22 to 23. Excuse me. That can't be understated. It cannot be understated. So again, let's go over some positives. I already went through a bunch of positives for Gannon. Head coaching experience, proven success record, right? When he was with Philly, and then when he left, there was a massive drop-off, right? I do want to talk about Arizona really quickly because I have already seen this on social media. Nobody's really said this to me, but I've seen it all over, right? They're basically blaming Arizona's poor performance on Jonathan Gannon, okay? we're going to go through it in a second. The Cardinals' defenses that he had when Gannon was the head coach there were quite literally some of the least talented defenses I've ever seen. And we're going to go through them for you guys. I do think in 2025 they had a little bit more talent. And early on this season, they were actually playing pretty well. They were top 10 in a lot of metrics before I would say the bottom fell out. They lost a ton of people to injury reserve. Not as many important people as the Packers, but anyway. So Gannon's first season in Arizona was 2023. Let's go through their roster really quick. And I apologize if I botched some of these names. I'm sure some of you guys know these people. Lakey Fotu, Jonathan Ledbetter, and Carlos Watkins. That was their defensive line. I'll have you guys look those people up. A couple of them aren't even playing anymore, and the others are backups. Okay, those were starters for the Cardinals that year. Linebacker, Dennis Gardeck. He was their pass rusher, by the way. I don't even think he is in the league anymore. Victor Dimukeje. I don't even know if I said that right. Those are the linebackers, right? Kaiser White and Chris Barnes were the inside linebackers. Chris Barnes, former Packer. Kaiser White did play for the Eagles during that Super Bowl season. I don't know how good he was. Doesn't matter. Their corners were Catrell Clark, Antonio Hamilton Jr., and Marco Wilson. Then they had Budda Baker at safety. And then Jalen Thompson was the other safety. So again, I'm going to say, I won't read it over again. You guys can rewind and listen to that again. That was the talent that Jonathan Gannon had his first season there. Okay? The fact that this wasn't the worst defense in the league is a pelt on the wall for Gannon. This is one of the worst defenses I've ever seen. I don't think any of those guys are even like notable. I don't even, again, Budda Baker is the only guy that's even a serious player. Where are the pass rushers? Serious question. Where are the pass rushers? Cornerbacks? Where are the corners at? Okay, so that's the first season under Gannon. They went like 4-12 or something like that, 4-13. 2024, the team goes 8-9 somehow. I think Kyler was healthy, but again, they floated out a defense with Bilal Nichols, Roy Lopez, and Justin Jones on defensive line. Who the hell are those people? Gardeck again at linebacker, Kaiser White, Mac Wilson, and Zaven Collins was a good player, right? There's your first infusion of talent. Sean Murphy Bunting at corner. Again, journeyman corner. He's a good corner. Probably has like a 77 rating on Madden. And then Starling Thomas the fifth, Garrett Williams, and then Max Melton, the rookie. He's a pretty good player. Then they had Jalen Thompson and Budda Baker at safety again. So again, more talent and improvement, right? But again, no pass rushers. These corners are nothing to speak of. No shutdown corners. Budda Baker has always been a little overrated. He's a good player, not a great player. This team went 8-9. I can't even believe this team went 8-9. And I don't hear anybody talking about how bad this Cardinals team was. You know, it's just, again, I'm not trying to be the Jonathan Gannon defender. I'll give you my overall thoughts at the end, right? But again, the fact that he made this team even competitive is, I think, a massive pelt on the wall for Gannon. Excuse me. And then in 2025, they started out well. They were top 5 defense through the first 3 quarters. And then the fourth quarter, they kept falling off a cliff. And you could look at that and there'd be a couple excuses there, right? I would say, the number one reason being they were put in some bad positions. But despite this low level of talent, this is an interesting stat. And this just goes to show you how well coached Jonathan Gannon's units are. In Arizona last season, they had the fewest coverage busts in the entire league. Or like the third fewest. I can't remember the exact stat. When Joe Barry came, and this is a really important thing, guys, this scheme that Jonathan Gannon runs is all about communication. This is the same scheme that they hired Joe Barry to do in 2021, which we could say, okay, well, look how well that worked out for Joe Barry. Well, let me give you some insight on that. Joe Barry tried to run this exact same scheme in 2021, but they had to bail on it because of all the coverage busts. So you have to communicate, and that's why I think Gannon, being into the details, that could lead to better results. We'll see, right? We'll see. So again, if they can play mentally sound football, you can make the best out of the players you have. That's one of the things that Gannon's talked about. There's a lot of talent on this defense for the Packers. I think that it could work out well. I do think there's a world, and I've heard others say this as well. I think the defense can be better next season with Gannon than it was with Hafley. I think Hafley got a little too much credit this year. I thought that, and I'm not the only, podcaster that said this, but I want you guys to think clearly. How talented that defense was in Green Bay last year, and then how many frustrating moments they had. The Dallas game, the Carolina Panthers game when they lost the game at the end there. There were a lot of games this year when they were healthy that they just weren't that good, right? The Giants game, Jameis Winston almost beat them. So I think there's a world where Jonathan Gannon could have a better unit out there next season. Now, where are the negatives? Let's talk about the negatives. What are the bad things? One of the things I don't like about this, and this is very nuanced, I don't have a ton of knowledge on this. I don't want to sit here and pretend like I'm this big scheme wizard, right? But one thing I don't like about this defense is it's very zone heavy. It's another one of those bend but don't break style defenses, so to speak. So very similar to what we saw in Green Bay last year with Hafley. Personally, I wanted a defense to have a little bit more aggression, a higher blitz rate, more, cover one, man-to-man coverage, stuff like that. Gannon isn't a big blitzer, and in Philly, to be fair, when he was there, he didn't have to blitz. They got pressure with 4 at a high rate. And then he didn't call the plays in Arizona, which is an important distinction. But Nick Rallis did, and the same scheme, right? But I do think that, you saw the flaws in this type of scheme last season. Teams were able to paper cut the Packers to death. Now, I do like that Gannon has a very large background. He's got a little bit of Eberflus in his background. He's got some Zimmer. I don't think he's going to be stubborn and say, oh, my scheme has to be this way. And he's talked about this before. He said, I don't really have a specific scheme. I put my players in position to win. He said that before. I love that, right? Maybe we see him be a little bit more aggressive with his personnel here. We were all, it was erotic to watch all the ways that Hafley used Micah Parsons last year. I think that Gannon can be even more creative with Micah. Now, another negative is his defenses haven't traditionally been very good against the run. That's a little concerning because, again, the Packers lost games last year when they were healthy because they were leaky against the run. So that's something to be aware of, right? That's why that defensive line depth is going to be so important, right? But here's the last thing. I think this is why a lot of Packers fans and a lot of people are just not fans of this hire in general. And it's because he's an awkward guy, candidly. If you guys haven't seen the clips, there were some pretty awkward exchanges when he was in a player meeting, running meetings in Arizona. It was all on Hard Knocks, by the way, if you guys want to watch it. Now, how big of a deal is this? Personally, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But when that's all we have to go off of as fans, these videos of him, the shoom, 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 shots or whatever. And then one of them was like, how many of you drove here? How many of you took the bus? Do you have the fire in your gut? Again, I don't know how much of a deal it is. It certainly doesn't seem like a big deal to me. He just seems like an awkward guy. I'm sure there's plenty of other awkward people out there in the NFL, right? But again, like I said, when this is all we have to go off as fans, you're going to think worst case scenario. But there's another clip where he was pulling up to a game. I believe it was the 49ers playoff game in 22. He's pulling into the parking lot and he screams out his window at the camera, "We're going to gut these guys." And they did indeed gut those guys. So I do think there's a little bit of fire in his gut, to use the reference. And then to kind of back that point up, in case you guys haven't seen this, this was a little disturbing. If you didn't watch Arizona this year, I don't blame you. I watched them a few more times than I wanted to. There was a game this year where I think it was DeMarcado, that's his name, returned a kickoff all the way to the end zone. He's about to score a touchdown and put the game away. Instead of scoring, he drops the ball in celebration right at the 1 yard line. And it goes into the end zone, ends up being a fumble. And the Cardinals don't get a touchdown, and then the other team gets it back. I think it might have been the Colts game. But Jonathan Gannon goes up and hits the guy in the stomach, right? Now, I did hear, and I don't want to defend it, this is bad, not saying it's good. I saw a lot of people say that Gannon punched him in the stomach. I don't think it was a punch, still uncalled for, but he did hit him in the stomach. And I think that, that's a huge red flag, right? But again, if you guys want aggressive, you want like a motivator, you want a guy with a chip on his shoulder, that's the kind of thing I want to see. Now, obviously, just, don't be a dick and hit someone in the gut. But, the fact that you got steamed up and you held him accountable for it, I do like that. Just got to be done in a different way, right? So let's kind of summarize here. Again, I wanted Jim Leonard. I wanted Christian Parker second, Durante Jones third, And then Raheem Morris was another one that, we talked about a lot. Apparently he's not even going to coach this season, so he's off the table anyway. I just wanted guys with a higher upside. And for the same reason, I think that's why LaFleur selected Gannon, because we've seen the upside. It's proven that he can take a defense to the highest heights. The other guys have not proven it yet. And again, I don't like these more passive defenses. And again, we don't know for sure if it's going to be the passive too high zone defense, bend but don't break, but it's safe to assume that's probably going to be the case. So those of you that are mad about this, though, especially if you wanted Leonard, let's just play it out, right? Let's just let it play out. Now, you very well might be right. Gannon might be bad. Now, I doubt that, but it's possible. It's also possible that Leonard is really bad in Buffalo. The other guys, I guess, we'll see on them too, but I've heard some crazy doomer shit about this hire from Packers fans. No offense to the majority of these people, but the people who are so steamed up about this don't know the first thing about defense. If I asked some of these, Facebook commenters, this is a horrible hire, Matt LaFleur's a moron, why would you hire him? Bring in Leonard. And then there's other people saying, like, why didn't we hire Al Harris? Al Harris has never done more than coach defensive backs. And by the way, the Bears had a bunch of interceptions this year, but they were the worst pass defense in the NFL. So was the Dallas defense when he coached there. Now, I think Al Harris could be a good DC. But the fact that we're shitting on this hire, these same people, if I said, hey, tell me the difference between cover 2 buzz versus cover 2 man, or Tampa 2 versus cover 3, cover 0 versus cover 1 robber. These are all coverage basics. If I asked these people that, they wouldn't even be able to tell me that. And again, I'm not sitting here saying I'm the expert either, but how about all of us, instead of having a really strong opinion, and there's people who are literally saying, I'm not even going to root for the Packers this season. Calling LaFleur stupid for this hire. Why don't we just see how it goes? Why don't we just see how it plays out? Maybe you're right. Maybe you're not. But if you're a Packer fan, why not hope for the best? Reserve judgment until we have some kind of proof. The other guys that we just talked about have never proven that they can coach a defense. Do I think they can? Yes, I do. But this hire made sense. It made perfect sense. And people who are way smarter than us all think this is a great hire. And by all accounts, people that have worked with Gannon, they've covered him. They all say he's one of the best humans in the sport. His players love him. They play hard for him. Yeah, he's a weird guy. Totally fair. But like I said, plenty of coaches are weird. Let's just see how it plays out. So we'll also see what the other things that the Packers are coaching up on their staff, or cooking up, I should say. I do think something's going to happen in the offensive line room. I don't know what they're going to do there, but I think that they need to change there. Excuse me. Whatever they do, we'll be here to cover it, right? Quick other news and notes. They did cut Trayvon Diggs last week. I do think that was pretty expected. I do think they're going to try and bring him back on a cheaper deal. I don't know why you wouldn't. They were never going to keep him at $15 million. Now, I don't know why they waited until then to cut him. I think they were just trying to, it's probably to do with, I don't know, maybe they want to see if he'd catch on somewhere. I don't know. I don't really know. But I do think that they're going to do a whole overhaul in the cornerback room this offseason. Do I think it's as important as the offensive line? No, the offensive line is priority number 1A. If they bring this exact corner room back next year and they add to the offensive line, the team will be better for that. So we'll see. A couple other things. Micah Parsons was named All-Pro. Not much of a surprise there. Xavier McKinney was second-team All-Pro. No surprise there as well. A couple other interesting guys that got votes. Christian Watson got All-Pro votes. I think he was worthy of, some votes. If he'd played the whole season, I do wonder what would have happened. And I do think that next season he has a chance to be All-Pro. That's how good he was this year. Daniel Whelan, the punter, got some as well. He should have made it. I don't know why he didn't. Evan Williams got votes, as did Zach Tom. Edgerrin Cooper as well. I guess Keyshawn Nixon got one as well. And then he ended up being a Pro Bowler too, which I'm sure some of you have takes on. I certainly do as well. And I'll spare them from this episode. Last thing, and I want to just touch on this really quick. We did find out officially that Gutey, Russ Ball, and LaFleur were given extensions. We already knew this, but it was made official. We talked about LaFleur's last week. Gutey, right? The only critique I have of Gutey was that they need more veteran leadership on this team. I think that's massively obvious. But I think the Micah Parsons move, stealing him from the Cowboys, and by the way, guys, they're going to cut Kenny Clark. So, Jerry Jones thought it was so important to have Kenny Clark. We needed a defensive tackle. And Kenny Clark's one of the best in the league. They're going to cut him. So, again, Gutey just looks like a genius for this, right? They got 1 year of Kenny Clark and 2 first-rounders. Stolen. I think that sealed his extension right there. With Gutey, he's been bad in the first round. That's been pretty well documented. But, again, they take lottery tickets in the first round. They hit big on Jordan Love. They're going to hit big again on somebody. I think Matthew Golden's going to hit. I think he's going to be a superstar. And I think this season gave us no reason to think that he won't be. Jordan Morgan showed some promise. We saw a little bit of a uptick from LVN as well. So again, the story's not written for these first rounders the last few years, but what he's done in the later rounds is why he's been successful, right? Zach Tom, what Romeo Dobbs has done, even though he's not coming back. We can keep going through the list. We will spare that for right now, but you get the point. And then Russ Ball gets an extension as well, right? He's been probably the best in the NFL at managing the cap. Every year, nobody talks about the cap moves that he does, but it's kept this team competitive for years. The fact that Micah costs like $19 million this year and Jordan's like $30 million. The way he's been able to use void years, signing bonuses, conversions from signing bonuses, all that stuff to make them, competitive. He's probably the best cap expert in the NFL at this point. So, again, I think it's awesome they got those guys extended. That's going to do it for today's episode, though, guys. Again, I hope this wasn't too haywire. I didn't mean to get so heated again, but I just feel like people just need to chill. People need to chill. Packer fans are the most doomer-ass franchise or fans I've ever seen in my life. And, I'm the guy who's in here obsessing over them, watching draft stuff, screaming at the TV every weekend, but I'm trying to be, if I can be positive, why can't you, right? Anyway, I'm going to try and upload a season in review episode this week, at least early next week, late next week, we'll see. We'll do a lot of stuff looking at the Packers pending free agents, lots of stuff planned. I'm excited. There have been a couple of draft questions. All I can tell you is offensive line, cornerback, defensive line. That's the main need. You pick whoever's the best at one of those 3 positions in the second, third, and fourth round. And then you shoot darts for the rest. But until the testing comes in at the combine early in March, there's not really much point in talking about draft stuff at this point. I'll probably give you guys like a preliminary list of people to look for, but that'll be coming as well. But I appreciate you guys listening. Hope you guys had a good week, and I will see you next week, guys. In the meantime, go Pack, go.